All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos, and I am joined by the very special guest, Father Turbo Qualls. Thank you so much for coming back, sir.
Oh, it's my joy to be with you again. It's absolutely my joy. Thank you.
No, our last conversation on the occult, it was so much fun. We went all over the place, and yet by the time we ended, it seemed like it was just a perfectly timed, full circle reconnect, and that was a beautiful stream. It was very popular. I got so much positive feedback from that stream, and one of the things you mentioned was humility, and you hit on it multiple times. One of the differentiating factors between the occult and orthodoxy, and that's what. And then I reached out to you. I knew you were so busy with Pascha that I was like, well, after Pascha, I would love for you to come on and let's just dive into the theology of humility.
Yeah.
And so, to begin this conversation, you can take us wherever you would like to go. How would you open up speaking to somebody who's not familiar with orthodoxy or maybe even Christianity? And humility. What's the role of humility? Why is humility important? And how this is going to pertain to the theology and our spirituality and our devotion and all this?
Yeah. So first of all, again, thank you for this opportunity. Like we were saying earlier, I am like the least qualified guy to speak about humility. And so I think my approach in regards of being able to speak with any authenticity is going to really come at it from a Christocentric lens, right? Because if we want to understand what humility is in an actual sense, we have to look to Christ,
right?
And so that's going to be. We're going to obviously keep coming back to the personhood of Christ and the Logos. But I think the thing I would say is, on a real low level, if someone was to come into an Orthodox service, come into a temple, one of the first things that they're going to notice, God willing, beyond the people mulling around and seeing the people come in and venerating, we'll get to that, they'll notice the icons. And what they will notice in the icons, as opposed to, if we're talking in a kind of North American context, right? And maybe not, they've had experience with religious art. Maybe not, they'll definitely be exposed to a proliferation of images, obviously.
Right.
They're going to be taken aback by the expressions of the icon. And what I mean by the expressions of the icon, not just the expressions on the faces of the saints depicted, but the expression in regards of even how the icon is presented compositionally, the way that it comes across to modern Western eyes. It's going to be, for some people, it's unsettling. For some people, it's jarring. If I could digress, I'd like to give a kind of
wherever you want to
go. There was a young man many years ago, before our parish moved to where we're at now. And at this time, our community was linked to a nonprofit. And so we would offer emergency services to people, needing help with gas bills, light bills, whatever. And so oftentimes people in crisis, they're in crisis, and so people's lives are constituted in such a way that they're not always able to put their best foot forward, so you're meeting people really where they're at. Right. So this young man, he's with his child and the mother of the child, and he was in a bad state, and he was in a bad state for all kinds of reasons. Yes, there's drug use involved, but that drug use is a symptom of something deeper, right? So long story short, we start talking, and it's more along the lines of asking for help, and in between the chit chat, he started talking about some things here and there. And I don't remember now at this point in time, but he brought up something like the Nephilim or something that. He had been watching YouTube, whatever. So
diving down the rabbit holes.
It pricked my ears up. I'm like, oh, blah blah blah, and he's like, oh, you know what that is? I'm like, well, I just kind of like showed him my robe. I'm like, well, you know, yeah. Well, welcome to St. Mary's, whatever. So anyways, long story short, we start talking and he's intrigued. And so at that time, our the parish was on the third floor of this kind of like a, old department store building, which had become the parish and then then the nonprofit. So I took him upstairs, and on the third floor, we come up the elevator, blah, blah, blah. And we walk in, and now take in mind, let me paint this picture for you. This is the third floor of an old department building, which, thanks be to God, it wasn't condemned. So in like really bad shape, but we made do with what we had. And a very, to say the least, humble iconostas. And the walls were, lined with, sometimes printed off icons, just every, you know what I mean? Very humble, right? He walks in and he looks around. And this is a guy who most people, maybe even most viewers, if they saw him in the street, they may think, might think twice talking to him, right? If you follow what I'm saying. He starts weeping. Not like a tear, he starts weeping. And he's looking around and he says, I always knew something like this was possible.
Wow.
And we just start talking, Real long story short, eventually he gets baptized and this whole thing happens. But the icon and what the icon expressed to him was this profound humility. And in that humility, the context of it, yes, the surroundings of the temple and how, for some people, they would even say this isn't even a proper Orthodox church, whatever. But it was the icon. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the quote unquote shabbiness of the building. It was the icon. And again, forgive me for zooming in too much. No. Also take in mind, humble iconostats. We're not talking 4 foot high icons. We're talking like you'd have to kind of get up there, but it's enough to see like. That's what I meant by the expression of the icon being humble. Mm-hmm. Not just the expression on the face of those depicted in the icon, but the icon itself.
Right.
We oftentimes underestimate what's really happening in the phenomena of the icon and what's being transmitted to us, especially us as modern Western people, is a profound sense of humility that is absolutely absent from our experience. Culturally, generationally. And when people encounter it, when people are themselves in a really humble state, it resonates with them on a level that is deep.
Wow.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah. Let's continue that. So this iconography, the artistic style of the icon, you can probably describe as humble. It's not. And we briefly touched on this in the last one on occultism. The icon isn't overly detail-oriented in the sense of being overly realistic, that there is a sort of obvious separation, but at the same time, it's portraying a historic humility. The icons are historic. They're actually depicting historical events. They're depicting things within space and time, yet the way we portray it is in a humble way. The event itself is almost always depicting something dealing with humility.
Yes. So again, this in of itself is so far removed from people's experience, even just like religious art in general. Because you take in mind too, and I don't want this to be taken in an uncharitable light. But we're just comparing and we're contrasting. But if you look at, even from my experience with like what would be considered conventionally speaking, quote unquote Western, religious art.
Sure.
What enraptures people oftentimes is the absolute beauty,
right,
in regards of the artistic skill that's put into place. Think of the Sistine Chapel,
the marble statues.
No one is going to say that that's humble.
Right.
You're right. It overwhelms you,
right,
because of the natural beauty that's being put forth, right? And so the theology behind that is different. I mean, you see that in the architecture in the West, in regards of spires and steeples moving upwards, jutting up, penetrating into the heavens, right? Whereas with the traditional Byzantine architecture, which, you know, in North America, we make do with what we have, right? But when people have, when money isn't an object or an issue, what do? They build domes, right? And the dome is this, you know, it's the square and the circle, heaven being the dome, the square being earth, but the dome coming down and meeting, right? Earth, right? There is this unity that happens, and there's a, if I could use this term, there's a mutual humility on both in this joining together. Whereas in a kind of conventional sense for the West, it's this jutting up, this penetration, which, you know, if you're adept enough theologically, you can kind of like make anything work. But I think when you kind of move past any type of attempt at sophistry and seeing how it affects the people, what's revealed again is there is a profound humility that we encounter when we enter into the life of the saints in heaven, primarily through the iconographic experience, right? It speaks to us, and so much more so now than ever before, because our minds are inundated with anything but humility. Our minds, the oversaturated colors of the screen, the oversaturated colors of everything from the comic book to the magazine, if people read them, right? There's a palette that someone almost has to begin to like cultivate when they become Orthodox, right? Because the icon presents a fast. It presents a fast to the eyes and to the senses in a way that we are so used to the fast food of images, again, saturation of color, you know, even in regards of compositions being designed in such a way to be almost, if I could use this term, instantly addictive. You know, this is why some people, I'll give you a little tip, you know, if you're having problems with your phone, you know, certain phones, you can set them to black and white. You can desaturate the screen. If you do that, actually that will help mitigate some of your addictive responses with the use of the phone. Wow. That's a whole, that's a whole thing. And for any of my brothers, for any young men out there, if you're struggling with some, you know, addiction with images, if you were to do that on your phone right there, coupled with prayer and some other things and spiritual guidance, you'd see some real progress and cutting away from those behaviors. But anyways, I digress, forgive me. The icon does this even now, because even when you have contemporary iconographers, which I am one, right? Like our tendency, we almost can't help it. You know, there's a certain pop that we employ, but even when it's like, you know, what I mean by pop, right? In a aesthetic sense, it's like you would take a strong contrast between a dark and a bright color, right? And you put them, you juxtapose them, and the bright will pop, right? That we call it a pop, right? Yeah. And so that prayerfully can be used to bring a person into the icon, but even then it's subdued and compared to how we experience art and religious art in the West, right? Because it's not trying to inundate and overwhelm your senses with a naturalistic beauty, right? Yeah. There's a humility that's baked into it.
Right. Even the sort of two-dimensional character of it, you know, we don't use three-dimensional, we aren't using statues. It's not overly realistic. And as you're speaking, one of the things that came to mind is the humility of the icon being able to transcend literacy itself. Yes. Right. So there's even a sort of humility in the absence of iconography, maybe Protestantism, at the absence of visual cues. The theology becomes very head-oriented because we have to read it, we have to rationalize it, we have to think about it. And this, as Orthodox, we understand the entire church, the entire theology as a mystery. It's mystical. And the icons, in a way, is this very humble presentation that transcends, you know, it bypasses so many of these registers of information, of how we process information, and can really speak to the literate or the non-literate person equally effectively.
Well, if I could, I would say not only can it does.
Right.
And this is why, you know, speaking of theology and theology of humility, like as we would all say, right? Like, and this is a common thing for us contemporary Orthodox, we'd say like a theologian isn't one who studies, but one who prays,
Yes.
right?
Right.
And so oftentimes one of the dangers of understanding theology in an exclusively academic or scholastic context is it puts a person in a vulnerable position spiritually, in which what they think they're apprehending is exactly that. It's a problem. They're apprehending a what versus a who.
Oh, yes.
Right? A what versus a who. The icon in some ways can help circumvent that, and on a in an almost imperceptible way, it presents you with this reality that you're encountering a who, not a what.
Right.
And that encounter of the person is it necessitates a fundamental humility.
Right. No, I
Right?
want to continue right there on the who, not a what, because this brings us into the understanding of whats don't practice humility, only whos.
Right.
And
Correct.
Christ is the icon of humanity, of mankind itself, of which we are trying to strive towards. And so this is a perfect segue to get into Christ as
Yes.
the icon, Christ, and then his humility. And so maybe you can take off and branch into the icon of Christ, who humility as a personal act.
Yes. The very fact that you and I are talking now, however many centuries later, however many millennia later, about the person of Christ, the fact that we are even still being initiated, longing to enter deeper into that mystery.
Right.
Why is that? What is that, right? Well, that phenomena is only possible because of the absolute humility of Christ. Because if Christ is to reveal himself in all his fullness and glory, you and I would be vaporized.
Right.
Not just metaphorically, like literally, right?
Right.
God condescending himself and becoming man. God condescending himself and allowing the means for us as his creation to enter into contemplation, to enter into experience. I mean, this is theosis, right? Entering into this relationship in which we are able to be transformed. This is only possible through his humility. And this is also why, kind of, if I could step back, getting back to, we are walking into the church for the first time, right? And so I brought up what someone encounters first and foremost, it would be the icons, right?
Right.
Well, what they would experience next is another kind of icon, which is human beings venerating.
Oh, yes.
Human beings, making matanyas or bows, sometimes making prostrations, right? That is another aspect of someone who's not initiated encountering the humility of Christ, right? They're encountering the humility of Christ because, again, they're watching people, and in this is our context, right? North America, Americans, who knows what we've been doing this week. You're watching just people, normal people that you would see at Target or wherever, making odd gestures that communicate inherently humility. Making a bow. What is that about? Where else do you see someone making a bow in our context in North America? Tell me.
Politics, maybe? I don't know.
Like maybe, but that's only if you're seeing one of our proud,
right? Exactly,
Western,
the opposite form,
right? The opposite, going somewhere else to a country that's much older, and that country and culture who's being much older, showing some sort of traditional, demonstration of humility, but you don't see it in our context,
right? No.
So what happens is you realize that people are at least attempting to encounter someone, right? And it's first and foremost before they would hear a prayer, right? Because even if they hear chanting, even if they hear, quote unquote, the music of the church, the choir, they're not deciphering what it is.
Right.
They are visually deciphering these bows these people are making. It's being communicated on a deep level, imperceptibly, humility. Right. Well, how do we know this? We know this because we're the people of God. Right. And as the people of God, we are entering into worship of him in the way that he has taught us. Right. Be holy as my Father in heaven is holy. Right. So in order for us to really start talking about the humility of Christ, the person of Christ, the icon of Christ, we have to understand that first and foremost, he is holy.
Right.
That first and foremost, the need for that humility. Christ demonstrates it for us out of love for us because he knows there's no other way for us to approach him.
Right.
Not because, again, this is why he's not Zeus, right? Not because he's like, how dare you come to me like this and I'm going to zap you, but out of real condescending, out of a love, out of a healthy, if I could use this term, forgive me if I'm wrong in my definition, out of an honest, healthy paternalism. He's like, the only way for you to approach me is through humility because of who I am and what I am. So let me teach you. Learn of me because I am meek and lowly of heart, right?
Right.
Do this, and in doing that, then you can approach me. Then we can have this communion that I so desire. But in order for this to happen, you must follow my way. There is no other way. Right? Not because I'm obstinate, not because, my way or the highway, but because I am uncreated alone. I alone am uncreated. And so because of that, in order for you to enter into proximity to me, on every level, on every aspect, ontologically, you must first become humble.
Yeah. No, and we mentioned this privately, how this, I just before the stream, preparing for it, I did some search on humble gods, humble deities.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's a pretty short list. You start going through there aren't many, and so it's just Christ, and then you look at the ancient gods, and it's Zeus, it's the god of thunder, it's the god of lightning, or it's Poseidon, the god of the oceans. It's in a way these sort of prideful, and we understand them as maybe embodiments of emotions or psychological process or whatever pagan, however you want to define the pagan deities and how they express themselves, but at the same time, the gods themselves are prideful of the things that they somehow have dominion over, and that's then their identity. The identity is the power that they have, and there is no then place for, you look in the ancient pantheons, there is no place for the humble God, and that humility through the lowliness. Somehow we're elevated, but that's exactly what we see with Christ as he demonstrates how we approach him. He's also demonstrating how he's approaching the Father. I mean, it's just this continual reciprocal feedback, and that's where he is the icon of how we then ingratiate ourselves with the divine, how we approach divinity. You look at the ancient world, and it's Caesar, it's burning incense to the emperor, it's human sacrifice, it's animal sacrifice, and then we see again in the humility of Christ, he's ending these processes. He's ending human sacrifice. He's ending animal sacrifice. He's ending the scapegoating. It's now on us. And so It's funny how then humility brings all these things together and is really what, in my mind, you start to look at there's other solar deities. People want to talk about the solar symbolism of Christ. But there is no humility. There is no humble God. Christ is the humble God.
Right. Forgive me. I want to, again, forgive me for all the anecdotal experiences, I share, but it's, I think, getting back to this place of where people are actually at, right? Because that's one of my that's something that's always on my heart is reaching people where they're at. Mm-hmm. And then from there, they can build up and they can get into the vast expanses of just the profundity of our faith, but let's start small, right? Metropolitan Anthony Bloom says something, and I remember saying this to my older son, and it blew him away. He didn't really know what to do with it, but struggling with his faith, and I explained to him, quoting Metropolitan Anthony Bloom, I said, God is powerless. Before you, in this sense. And he was like, what do you mean? I thought God was all powerful. And I said, oh, he is. But he's powerless in the sense of he doesn't force you.
Yes. Oh, this is a great point.
He won't force you.
Right.
Now let me stack this over here and let's build off of this, right?
Yes.
I think about this all the time, right? All the time. I'm so humble, no pun intended. I'm so humbled to be a priest. I'm unworthy, truly. And I mean that with every fiber of my being. And the fact that my life revolves around the holy things. And it's never lost on me that when I'm looking at the Holy Eucharist in the proskymedia, right? And then and even during the liturgy of Nafra, looking at God. Let's think about something, right? us who are initiated, let's think about something. We experience him as God. He reveals himself to us truly as God, truly. Not as wheat and not as grapes. How does he present himself to us? As bread and wine.
Mm-hmm.
In order for there to even be bread and wine, he needs us.
Oh.
We don't offer wheat and grapes. He's commanded us to offer bread and wine. Bread and wine is fundamentally a synergistic act.
Right.
We cannot bring about wheat in of ourselves. That alone is God's. But God calls us to take the wheat and it must die and then bring forth bread. The grapes must be fermented and the process of making wine. That's a synergistic act.
Yeah.
Do you see where I'm going with this?
It's a great
That
point.
in itself is humility.
Yeah.
Even in how he's chosen to reveal himself in his fullness.
Right.
This in itself is an act of ultimate humility, which boggles the mind.
Yeah, no, and I love that example you just had with the bread and the wine and the necessity for us in a way to participate in this process, that the way that Christianity recognizes the free will made in the image of God. God doesn't force you.
That's right.
And so in a way, then God then only provides humility as the way out. But he allows you to go through your pride. He allows you to do all these things. You look at Neoplatonism or all these Platonic forms of theology, and God he really only loves himself. That God emanates from himself out into the world, and then everything's going to come back to him. And so God really only loves himself. In the Trinity, we see a God that's three persons, one essence, a God that can love the other. And he loves us as creation in the sense that he only wants us to truly love him, which then requires free will, which requires us to then submit. But unlike the king, unlike Caesar, he doesn't force us to submit. We have to come to our own humility.
And forgive me, because I'm too dull of a man to discuss these things on a high level. I'll gladly hear from you on this one. But I do want to bring up, it's like one of the few times you'll catch me talking about universalism, because it's problematic, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what they miss and what they don't understand is the humility of God, because what they understand correctly is that God absolutely loves all of creation, including the fallen ones. But what they miss is that love is revealed par excellence in his refusal to force.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Even still, the humility in the face of those who reject him.
Right.
Getting back to this icon of Christ, think of all the ways the economy of salvation could have played out. It comes in everything you mentioned, in a manger, like all of the things, right? We can get into that.
Yeah.
But one thing that I really like to point to people is his disciples were these all but illiterate, blue collar, working class, if I could use that term. I know it's a modern term, but they weren't the professional academics and scholars and even businessmen, which would have been, yes, he had a publican, he had Matthew. Okay, sure, right? Mm-hmm. There's one, but no professional clerics.
Right.
They weren't amongst his disciples, and even the small amount that he had, 12, one of them betrayed him.
Right.
Like, we spend Lent and especially Holy Week meditating on the betrayal of Judas. But I think it might do us well to meditate on it a little bit more throughout the year. Because when you recognize the fact that the whole time, right, God knows what was going to happen. Right. And yet in his humility, was there some miracle that he showed the others that he didn't show Judas? Was there some, right? Was there some hidden mystery that he whispered to Andrew that he didn't whisper to Judas?
Some prideful esoteric knowledge? No, he didn't. Mm-mm.
No. Like this is the humility, like all those things, all the things we could talk about coming. I mean, one of the ones that's always profound for me, with Palm Sunday and coming on, like on the ass of a colt, like that's
another great,
I mean, that's incredible, understanding the delusion of the demons,
right,
and the delusion of the demons in the guise of the ancient pantheons, because that's what they are, right? You know what I mean? They're the masks of the demons,
right?
um, him being like, how far away from that can I get? Right? He goes as completely far as possible. And he doesn't come as some stellar champion. He will, though.
Right.
Right? He will. But until that time, we only know him and can enter into communion with him as the crucified one.
Right.
Right. And understanding this, I was teaching catechism to the kids. I do that every Friday here at our school. And we're explaining to them this understanding. One of the young ones, this young one, Seraphim, so good. He says, we're talking about crucifixion. And we had a young girl in our school who's not Orthodox, and with God's help, she's being exposed to Christianity and Orthodoxy. And her mom, her mom's like kind of like a neo-pagan, whatever. And she says like, oh, we're talking about the cross. And she kind of like, grabs one of her, grabs her necklace, whatever. And she's like, oh, my mom says this is like my cross, And so I said, well, not quite, sweetheart. And I kind of break it down for her. She's a little girl, break it down for her. I started explaining to the kids. I said, well, guys, there's a reason why the Lord chose crucifixion, right? I said, why don't we walk around with electric chairs hanging from our necks? Why don't we walk around with, beyond bling, right? Why don't we walk around with AR-15s around our necks? Why don't we walk around with guillotines around our neck? Right. Why is it the cross? Right. Like what is it? Because the cross is not just the fact that it's a necklace. What is it? And one of the young kids, he says, I said, it's a means of execution, yeah, but is that it? Is that simply it? Because if it was, we would why not another instrument of death? Right. And out of the mouth of babes, right? He got it. He said, because the cross was humiliating. I said, bingo. Bingo. And that's why the cross is so powerful. Right. That's why the cross causes demons to flee, and it causes the proud to be humbled to their core, because the cross is a symbol, first and foremost, beyond death of a physical nature. It's death of the ego and of pride and these things which fundamentally keep us from God. Right. So out of the mouth of this beautiful child, he understood the power of the cross, right? And this is what we need to understand. The humiliation in which he endured, that is the path to life. And we are in many ways inoculated to it as Christians, right? We hear it all the time, the cross, the cross, the cross. We see it, we venerate it at the end of liturgy. But we really need to stop every once in a while and allow our systems to become sensitive again. Right? We need to allow our systems to become sensitive to the shocking reality of what the cross means on every level. If you follow.
No, I am, and it's totally consistent with what we were talking about before we started streaming. Is the multiple examples, the iconic examples of Christ's humility. One, the fact that you even became a man, oh my gosh, he has male genitalia, and this has been part of the Orthodox. Oh no, he doesn't have male genitalia. No, he's fully man. He's fully God. That is part of the humbling, the humiliating. If you are the logos to become a man, that is in a way humiliating. But what he's doing is lifting us up with him. The hanging with the lowliest of, as you're talking about, the disciples, the lepers of society, the tax collectors, all these different. Well, he shows that Christ, God incarnates as man, and as man, he isn't getting people to just demand and perform the miracles to get people to worship him per se. It's to reveal the reality of who God is and how we follow God, and how he fulfills then this capsule in time that God has been using Israel. He was using the Jewish people to reveal himself through the prophets, throughout all the stories, so that then his son, the Logos, can incarnate and then fulfill all these things, that all these different prophecies have been fulfilled in one historical person. They've been written by all these different people. He still hangs out with the lowliest. He was born among. Go ahead.
I want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so shall the Son of Man be lifted up. And when I'm lifted up, I'll draw all men unto me. Mm-hmm. The serpent, the lowliest of symbols. Yep. Right? On its belly does it crawl, right? Right. And this even now in a modern context, associated with kind of evil, all this stuff. Christ intentionally chooses to associate himself with this in the cross. Right. You know, if you look to your left in that icon there of our Lord on the cross, that depiction in the Orthodox canon of the Lord, he is the King of glory, and he must have that meek, peaceful countenance. Mm-hmm. It isn't like in Western depictions where he's maybe, you know, this agonized, pitiful figure, right. Because that's not humility, it's right. Victimhood.
Oh, right.
You see what I'm saying? And so it's important that we also understand what's happening here, because I'm sorry I interrupted. I just wanted to touch that on, because obviously we'll get into some of what it means to experience humility as humble as we are. But what Christ demonstrates in this sense of the crucifixion and this association of being lifted up on high, like Moses lifted up the serpent, there's a profound mystery there, because even for us, Christ is not concerned or worried about being associated with something that's vile, like a serpent. Just like he wasn't concerned about being associated with the harlots and the tax collectors. Forgive me. That's why I wanted to interject real quick.
No,
because it's intentional,
right,
all across the board, right?
Well, and then this one right here, the nativity. I was going to say Christ was born in a stable, right? That's we're talking about the Savior of mankind, and the inn didn't have enough rooms, and so his parents, Mary gives birth to God incarnate around animals in a stable. Again, humility, that he worked as a carpenter, right? He wasn't an aristocrat. He wasn't, going around and having people kiss his hand. No, he worked. He experienced what it is to actually be a man. And then what I used for the thumbnail for today's stream, he washed the feet of his disciples right before he goes to the most humiliating part of the story, is the betrayal by his own friends, the being betrayed by his own people in regards to the Jews, beaten by the authorities for not doing he didn't violate any law, he didn't violate anything. He's humiliated by the Pharisees in public to always demean his ministry or what he's trying to demonstrate. Again, it usually turns around and looks bad on the Pharisees, but the pride of the institution, again, of these worldly, powerful institutions trying to shame truth, trying to shame God. We see it now live and well in our own society. And then naked and dying on a cross. Our icons cover him up, but what's more humiliating to not only be dying for something that you didn't do anything wrong, but also to be naked in front of your mother who knows who you are.
Oh, yes. And forgive me, I want to digress just a little bit.
Go wherever you want to go.
I don't want to get too far from this. This is very powerful, and I bring it up a lot to my spiritual children, because it's something that I think resonates for us. But the washing of the feet of Peter. Mm-hmm. Do you remember this exchange?
Yeah, I have the verse. I can read it real quick if you'd like.
Please.
Okay, so this is John 13. Let me read it in the Orthodox Study Bible. Everybody get your Orthodox Study Bible. So this is John 13, verses 1 through 17. Jesus washes the disciples' feet. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come, that he should depart from this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. And supper being ended, the devil having already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from supper and laid aside his garments, took a towel and girded himself. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Then he came to Simon Peter, and Peter said to him, Lord, are you washing my feet? Jesus answered and said to him, What am I doing you do not understand now, but you will know after this. Peter said to him, You shall never wash my feet. And Jesus answered him, If I do not wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter said to him, Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head. And
Mm.
Jesus said to him, he who is bathed needs only to wash his feet, but is completely clean. And you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would betray him. Therefore he said, you are not all clean. So when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you should do as I have done to you. Most assuredly I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is he who is sent greater than he who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them.
Amen. So this portion, when the Lord in his humility and his love, right? Because the Lord's humility is an absolute expression of his love.
Mm-hmm.
And he begins to wash the feet of Peter. And Peter, in his pride, you see, we can interpret that as Peter saying like humility, but it's actually Peter's pride. And Peter in his pride, he's like, no, Lord, you'll never, you know what I mean? It's not for you to do for me like that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And the Lord says, Peter, if you don't let me do this, essentially, you have no part of me nor my kingdom, right?
Right.
This is a direct beckoning to that humility.
Mm.
You must learn to receive. You must.
Mm.
You must. And you know, this is maybe a little rabbit trail you and I will get on, but this is what it means to start for many of us men. If you ever struggle with understanding that you're the bride of Christ, this is where you must begin. You must learn to receive.
That's a deep one. Yeah.
You must learn to receive, right? So he says, if you're going to have any part of me, right, and my kingdom, you must be my bride. You must learn to receive. But notice Peter's response, which is profound. He says, yea, Lord, not just my feet, but my hands and my head. Mm-hmm. If we begin to understand the feet, blessed are the gospel, the feet who carry the gospel of peace, right? The feet are a symbol of movement, right? It's a type of action and being, right? We just came out of, I'm on the calendar, we just came out of the paralytic, was this gospel for Sunday. And the paralytic being, St. Theophylact says in St. John Chrysostom, this inability to move, right? Mm-hmm. So Peter, he's needing to have his ability to move, to be purified, to be washed by the Lord. But he says, my hands and my head, the hands being a symbol of work. Right. Because there's movement being, kind of a symbol of just ontology of being. Right. But work is the manifestation of that, how it's articulated in the world. Right. His work needs to be washed and purified, but his head also, his understanding. Right. Unless we have God bless our being, baptism, bless the work of our hands and our understanding, right? We have no part of him. Right. We must fundamentally submit our being, fundamentally submit our work. Why do we fear the loss of our faculty so much? For many of us, we look at Alzheimer's and dementia as a living hell. Why? Because it's fundamentally gets to how we understand personhood. Yeah. The cognitive abilities, right? Mm-hmm. And the ability to produce, especially for men, the ability to produce is manifested in our hands. Right. Peter's saying, I must submit these things to you also, Lord. Not just the fact that I exist, but also how I exist. Do you follow what I'm saying? Right, yeah. We must be willing to have those things submitted in humility, even unto shame to God. This is why, for me, I go to this scripture so often with people, because we so many times will find ourselves presenting, here, God, this is what I've done. Here, God, this is who I am. And it's an unclean offering. It's strange fire, right? Right. Because if it's not done in humility, then it's not actual.
Right.
You don't really know who you are
right.
until you've been stripped away.
And
this is
to present your work to God, to present your knowledge to God, again, is a form of pride.
Yes.
To submit your being to God is a full submission.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is why so much, and this is why I would submit, forgive the rabbit trail a little bit, but even like in the natural world where we'll see certain things like rites of passage and things like that, what they are is really they're a natural expression of a truth that God has implanted in us as human beings, right? There is, that kind of hazing, that submission to the greater community, that submission to reality as you understand it is necessary. You have to enter into a rite of passage humbly or you won't make it through. Right. This is fundamentally a foreshadowing of what's fulfilled in the catechumenate, which is fulfilled in the baptism. And all of these things are really first and foremost foreshadowed and fulfilled in this moment where Peter says, "Yea, Lord, wash my feet and my hands and my head. I submit."
Right.
See, Peter was to be eventually like, he's the rock, blah, blah, blah. But how does he get there? He can only get there through this initiation, which is the main one, humility. Right. If you don't learn to receive, then what? How can I give to you? Right. How can I? And this is the secret of humility, right? If you don't learn to receive, how can I give to you? Right. Like you and I in our poverty, there's nothing that we can give to God anyways, right. No matter how deluded we think we are.
Right. It's so prideful to think otherwise.
Right? So this humility, it's a profound secret of just being.
Right.
This is how you learn to be.
Right.
Right? Is this humility. Yeah. The seraphim model this for us,
Well, in scripture too, it's in Matthew that Christ says, learn what this means. I came for the sinners. I ask for mercy, not sacrifice. And so again, sacrifice, whether it be animal sacrifice, human sacrifice, sacrifices of work, sacrifices of knowledge, everything is a sacrifice to become disciplined, become healthy, fit. All of it, there's a sacrifice. I did a video on sacrifice and progress. There is no progress without some type of sacrifice. It's an exchange. Christ, the sacrifice is our own humility. That's what we're sacrificing. And when you're talking about Peter, the other thing, and then Peter in his pride, Christ says, you're going to deny me 3 times. And in his pride thinks that he's not going to. But then again, that's how we're also confronted with the world. We also kind of shy away from the humility that's going to be forced upon us if we're going to follow Christ and not deny him. But it's so much easier to deny him. And really that is a form of not humility, but pridefulness, because we don't want the world to persecute us.
That's right. And more importantly than that, we don't want God to persecute us as we perceive it, right? Let me share something with you. I was sharing this Monday. This was the homily I gave on Monday, but I was saying, there is this profound mystery that God is beckoning us into. Mm-hmm. And it's difficult for people to hear, this is what I think is some meat. This isn't necessarily milk. So to get the qualification. But it says in Romans 8:28 that all things work for good for those who love God or are called to his purposes, right? And even getting back to what we were speaking of earlier in regards of Christ being raised up like Moses raised the serpent of old. And remember that account with the brazen serpent. The fiery serpents were biting the Israelites, right? And how do you make venom, right? How do you make anti-venom? Right. You have to take a little bit of that venom. Right. You see where I'm going with this? Yep. So and only God can do this. This is another evidence that we worship the living, true God. Right. He alone can take sin. And only to the initiated does that sin becomes a mean of life. Right. We do not enter into sin willingly, lest grace abound, God forbid, right? But he takes those moments of our sin. And oftentimes those of us who are initiated, we become proud in our piety. We begin to think, look at the edifice of virtues I've built. Right. And we begin to lose sight that no. And this is actually Elder Nikon of Aptina, St. Nikon. He's like, without humility, these edifice of virtues, they will crumble. And so God, even in the life of a believer, and this is the profound secret, the profound mystery, he'll take your sin when you are committed to him, when you are his doulos, when you are not just his slave and his servant, but you become his son, he'll take even your fall and draw you closer to it. He'll take your fall, he'll take your sin, and he'll use it for the necessary humility that you need to enter closer to him. Because without it, you are bringing what you think is this profound offering, but it's filthy rags to him.
Right.
And the sin that is, because we're not just talking about moral choices, but a disease that infects us, that he alone can purify us of. He uses that sin and he says, draw closer. In the fear of God, in faith and love, draw near. This awareness, which he is gentle in, he doesn't throw it in our face unless we become so proud, right? Because some of you may have that experience of becoming so proud, where it's just like, boom, it blows up in your face, and you're like, oh my gosh. And then he comes and he says, okay, now I'll pick you up, right? But other than that, he's very gentle, and he lets us peek in and how our sin it's just enough anti-venom. Right. If you understand, you see where I'm going with this. And that is the power of God. Right. Because the demons will come in, and they do this so many times with the ascetics and people who are deluded, right? They like, you think that you're worthy of seeing of catching a vision of Our Lady. You think you're worthy of catching a vision of Saint Gabriel, right? You're deluded, right? And so God, he works through our delusion. He says, no, I don't even need to come to you in dazzling light and power. Right. I'll come to you in the most humblest of ways. Right.
Are
you with me?
Yes. Yeah. And what's so amazing is as you go down this Orthodox journey, this Christian, it all makes sense that any other way wouldn't be as profound. It wouldn't be as so encompassing of all reality. It stands apart. It becomes clearer and clearer the more that you deal with it, the more that you, again, in our humbleness, try to approach it. And I loved what you're talking about. God doesn't need these rags, these works, these things out here. And again, getting back, Christ asks for mercy and humility. And it's like,
in fact, they'll get in the way, right? Yeah, in fact, oftentimes the works of your virtues, you build an edifice, which is really what you think is you're building a temple. Really, you're building a wall between you and God. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So you need to have, in many ways, humility is the mortar.
Yeah.
That's necessary to build a temple versus a wall.
And it's the ultimate. When you were talking this last part, what popped in my mind is that it's through humility, which would be the most direct way that we can really commune with God, because God himself became man and expressed the most ultimate means of humility itself. I mean, he died for all these sins, the sins of the world, people who weren't even born yet, for things he didn't do. There's nothing more self-sacrificial. There's nothing more humble than the story of Christ. And so as we experience suffering, as we experience humility, we're getting a glimpse into an experience shared by the incarnate God. It's through there that we now step into a shared experiential realm. And so maybe you can go into this literally we commune with God through the suffering and the humility. We don't commune through the scapegoating and the animal sacrifice. That's not what he's asking for.
No, because again, fundamentally, the scapegoating, the animal sacrifice, all these things, number one, those processes, they fundamentally, and this can get us into a whole kind of Girardian, stream. We could get into this whole thing, but fundamentally, those things become about us. Right. Still, they're still egocentric. They're still exactly like what we offer, what we want, who we are. He is beckoning us to him through union, and he circumvents all of the channels, all of the means by which communion is impossible on a human level. What do I mean by that? We understand community and communion through the processes of how we understand, on a sociological level. Man, woman, father, son, father, daughter, mother. Are you following what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Each one of those has the necessity of hierarchy, because reality is built upon hierarchy, right? Because the Holy Trinity is the pinnacle, right? But he inverts that pinnacle, right? He inverts the pinnacle. And this is the means, again, because in order for us to enter into communion, he has to take out all of the means in which we get in the way. So in other words, When Christ says to Peter, like, no, Peter, unless you let me wash your feet, you have no part of me. He is circumventing that channel in which Peter would begin to look at him as the kind of necessary step of getting to the top of leadership, right? Let me digress a little bit. You watch this. There's a phenomenon, and René Girard is really keen on exposing this. But if you have some sort of structure, some sort of hierarchical structure, as long as that hierarchy is clear and defined, right, there's no problem. But the second that the quote unquote second in charge, third in charge senses that there's some potential for equality, what kicks into gear then is this phenomena of competition. And then the person who's second in charge is going to want to fundamentally overtake the one who's in charge, right?
Right.
Satan, Lucifer. Are you following me? Right? The delusion of pride, right? Lucifer is fundamentally deluded.
Right.
And I'm not trying to, speak beyond but when you begin to understand the absurdity, if you think about the fall of Lucifer, how would you even consider that you would think that you would be equal to God, right? And this is where the Satanists, like the Levian stripe, this is where they actually get something very accurate in regards of seeing Satan as a kind of anthropomorphic projection of like pride and like, the kind of like the desires of man. That's accurate, right? Because this is built into us because of the fall.
Right.
We fundamentally want to always overtake the next guy.
Yep.
Right? You don't really want, this is Girard. You don't really want the beer in the ad, right? You want the life that the guy in the beer ad has. You don't really care about what the person possesses. You want their life. You want to overtake them, right? Mm-hmm. In many ways, you want to murder them so that you can have their place, right? Christ says, I'm going to cut all that out. Yes, he's God, beyond all that, but he says, I'm going to cut all that out and I'm going to go low. Mm-hmm. I'm going to make it so that I'm going to take away even the temptation for you to want to overtake me.
Yeah. Oh,
do you understand? Do you see?
Yes.
Do you see? I love you so much. I know how broken and twisted you are, man. I'm even going to take away that temptation.
Right.
I'm going to go where you aren't even going to want to go.
Right.
Right. You're not even going to want to kill me so that you could be on the top.
Right.
Right. Which is what Lucifer thought he could do. Right. Are you following me with that? Right.
Yes. And that again, and it's through the humility, because are you going to out humble Christ? I mean, that's the only way to go lower. Right. But that's can't.
The only way. You can't. Only God could. Like, this is why maybe it's because I'm old and I'm tired. I don't know. But I haven't had a quote unquote vigorous debate with an agnostic or like an atheist or a pagan in a long time. And God forgive me, it's not even out of like, I'm above that, because I'm not, you know what I mean? But it's just, I just chuckle now because I'm like, you don't even understand.
Right.
Like, you don't even understand how absurd Christ is in his humility. Right. Like, there's no point in, like, all of you guys out there who are debating, like, God bless you. God bless your efforts to debate. But let's just understand something. Until someone gets a glimpse of the radical humility of Christ, like, they don't get it, right? That is what actually brings us into communion with him, is this radical humility. And it's the thing that now, in turn, paradoxically and profoundly, we want to now imitate. But we want to imitate it without the overtaking. He takes that process that's in us of wanting to compete or wanting to overtake, and he inverts it. And instead of wanting to do it through murder, like Cain and Abel,
right,
we now want to imitate. We want to emulate. He takes that naturally mimetic aspect of us, and he disarms the murderous aspect of it. And he says, okay, no problem. Be as I am. Be meek and humble as I am. And in doing so, instead of this perpetual eternal cycle of death and murder, we will enter into love and communion. Be like me. I will go low. And in me going low, if you want to, if you will, follow me. And in this follow, we will now dance.
Yes.
In this following of me and emulating me, we will now forever be in this this communion,
Right.
right? This dance of humility. Does that make sense?
No, while you were speaking, what came to my mind is, the differences between this Christ-centered humility and the humility that most secular people may consider the world. And you're talking about the sort of hierarchies of pride in the world. And so then you have people, I've joked around about the hierarchy of Satan is, there is no honor amongst thieves. And so this hierarchy maintains its structure because everybody's trying to climb up it and backstabbing the person in front of them, which in a way actually maintains his position on top and maintains the formation of this sort of hierarchy. And so when we think of the world, people of powerful positions or a world leader, and then we say, it's so show respect, be humble amongst these people. But all of this, in a way, is part of this larger worldly, not everybody's evil or anything, but everybody to some degree is filled with this worldly pride. And yet it's through this real Christ-like humility that we sort of turn away from that and really experience humility. And now we're in the presence of God. So it's like now we're actually we are bowing down to Christ in the real, authentic experience of humility. It's like now we've shifted focus. And now we're actually in the presence of God in a sort of prostrating, metaphorically speaking, a prostrating, humble position, recognizing who he is.
Yes. And we have to do that because he wants to give us good things.
Yeah.
He wants to give us himself. But how can you give if you're not able to receive?
Oh, man. Which again ties back to Peter and the washing of his feet.
That's right. And so this is the secret to humility. Humility is not thinking terribly of yourself. It's thinking less of yourself, less often of yourself. Humility is about a radical honesty. Because fundamentally, when you recognize there's nothing good apart from God, then you're able to finally begin to receive. And isn't that what we all want? Right? We all want love. We all want these good things, but you can't receive it unless you have the necessary humility.
Right. And I think about humility as uniquely an attribute, again, of this concept of who. It's a personal expression. And so we think of, for example, psychedelics. Okay, what would humility in this context of the sort of the new age psychedelic sphere be? Well, it would be to get into an altered state of consciousness one way or another, realize that the ego is that I'm David Patrick Carey. That's a problem. And then by annihilating that, becoming, Cosmic Starseed is my new name. And now I'm one with the cosmic consciousness, that now I'm actually more humble. But as an Orthodox, as Christian, we look at that and be like, you couldn't be more prideful. You're literally claiming that you are God. You're claiming you're, in communion with God, or that esoteric knowledge or secret experiences that we don't know. And they're actually annihilating their personhood. So Judy Smith or John Doe, that they are then annihilating their personhood to, in their concept, become more humble, to become less egoic, where this Orthodox Christian concept is forcing the ego. It's forcing David Patrick Carey not to annihilate it, not in a way to almost escape it, to take it on, to bear it as a cross of Christ. Yes. And to then reorient. I have to be humble. I have to do this. That it's not some annihilation of humility. It's actually personal humility. And then and then again, it's ironic. We're not worshiping an abstraction of unity of God or God's oneness. No, we're worshiping a Trinity, of which the second person became a man, a person.
Yes. So, I don't know the rating. I don't know the parental guidance rating we have on this one, but with your blessing, I would like to actually go into something kind of explicit.
Absolutely.
Because I hope it might be helpful.
Absolutely.
Okay. And please, may God forgive me if this is scandalous for anyone, but I think it's important. The process in which people engage in psychedelics, for those who understand, who have experienced it, of the come down, right? And the coming down is actually when people will get what they would perceive to be the actual profound kind of insights, right? So the frenzy in which you're in the height of the experience isn't really quite where you get the profound insights. It's in the coming down. But see, the problem with it is that mechanism in of itself is a kind of humility, right?
Yeah.
Because it's in that being subjugated now, like you've kind of come out, you made it through, and you're just to come down, you're like, okay, like what happened? But the problem is, again, with any of these situations is they're antichrist in the sense of it's presenting an affect of humility.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Yeah.
It's presenting an affect of humility, but in reality, what's still at the center of your understanding and your awareness is whatever projection came back to you, or whatever logisme or whatever whisper was presented to you in that state.
Right.
So if you're following me, right, those who've experienced, you know what I'm talking about. Like you come down, and that's where it's like you get your insights, and you're humble, and it's like, okay, wow, like whatever, you're trying to come to yourself. But without Christ, who is the truth,
right?
Truth is a person. All these things are affect, which is why, and I just want to forgive me, you know, I want to go there, and I know this is not going to be PC. And again, there are foreshadowing of these things in ancient cultures, but they're a foreshadow which only find their fulfillment in Christ. Some of the affect that you experience in certain, you know, Far Eastern culture of humility, it's an affect which can be an on-ramp to participation in the life of Christ. But let's just be clear, without him, it's just an affect.
Right.
If you follow what I'm saying.
Yep.
If I could just refer St. Gregor Nazianzen, right? In this oration on his father, it's incredible. He talks about how his father was this, you know, brilliant statesman, all the stuff. But he says, essentially, it wasn't in any of those things that people would know my father that he was found to be great. It was in my father's humility, which was hidden to everyone else. It wasn't in the closeness of the shave of his head, the length of his beard, or the stature in which he held office. It was in who my father was. I'm paraphrasing him.
Mm-hmm.
St. Gregor Nazianzen, he's talking about his dad in a sense. He says, the greatness of my father was his humility, which was hidden to everyone else. It was imperceptible to everyone else. This is Christian humility. This is Orthodox humility, and people could miss it because for us, we've been given to our tradition. We have these external, which, you know, there's a place for the externals. There's these external affects of our humility. But let's just be clear. If that isn't first and foremost, primarily an internal experience, you're still missing it. The affect of humility is not the thing. And Christ coming with having nothing worth of you know, his visage was nothing worth, you know, nothing of worth that we would have missed him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every aspect of Christ is humble, but first and foremost, this inner disposition is what we must have. And so we can, you know, we talked about this last time, the kind of false light. And there's a false humility that people could enter into. And people can mistake scraping and kowtowing, all these things. Like, God isn't wanting you to come and kowtow to him because you're a worm, and he's wanting you to be humble, truly humble, not an affect. You're not going to fake God out, right? He's going to see you right through it. You can be doing all, and again, I'm not trying to draw a false dichotomy between, you know, our postures of prayer and our inner disposition, because those things do affect us. Mm-hmm. Effect with an E.
Right.
But the affect of presenting a humility because this is like, well, what I got to do to get into where I need to get into. No. It has to be truly
right.
Your inner disposition, right?
Yeah.
And this is really key because the Eucharist and again, like we started off kind of early in the conversation, when we begin to meditate on what the Eucharist is, who the Eucharist is, and the fact that he even chooses to be brought forth through a synergistic act between his people and him. When we meditate on these things, this is the way to having true humility in our hearts. This is why the church calls us to meditate on death. It's not some sort of morose, fixation on death. It's an honest reality that you will be laid low. Mm-hmm. So the church calls us to meditate on death. So the necessary humility to understand who God is and what it means to enter into his presence. All of these things that the church gives us they are necessary to receive the light, like the true light. He is the true light, right?
Right.
But in order to receive it and not a false light, we must have the proper disposition, because anything else than that leads us to delusion. Right.
Right. No, I again, as you were speaking, I kept thinking about how Christ, as again being the sole sort of God of humility, the humble God, is showing us that it's only through humility you can properly approach God, because if God is God, and if we're going to show respect, the only way to do it is to show our own humility. And yet we see again the machinations of the evil one, all these spiritual worldviews, paradigms, subtly get people to destroy this path one way or another. And this path, at the same time, again, I love the both and, the paradox of orthodoxy is always both and. Christ forcing the humility, our authentic, genuine self-humility, is the only way that we can approach God, therefore signifies there is no shortcut, the affect of the sight, but at the same time, it's the ultimate shortcut, right? Because you get, like, you don't have to be a journeyman, you don't have to be a scholar, you don't have, so it's like at the same time, he forces the authentic thing, which prevents the shortcuts like the sight, but at the same time, it is the ultimate shortcut.
That's right. This is why, if anyone wishes to enter the kingdom, they must come as a child. And for those of us who have children, you can scratch your head and be like, man, sometimes children can be those arrogant little things because they think they know everything. But see, that's when they're being childish.
Oh, great point.
We must be childlike. And when a child is childlike, and they, I experience this when one of my kids they're looking to me for everything. That's being childlike. Right? And all they want is to receive the love of their papa. That's all they want.
Yeah.
That's childlike. That's what he's beckoning. But when they fall into like, oh, you don't know anything, Dad, then it's like, well, we'll come back around to when you're
well, then that's working on your humility, right?
That's right. That's right. Thank God.
Yeah, I've never connected that dot in the sense of the sort of shortcut. Yet it is a shortcut. It's not a shortcut, but we see then Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and it's only through this way of humility that we can even approach the truth. And I mean truth. Capital T is Christ.
Correct.
But then these lowercase truths, the truths of our experiential life, as we, again, try to get things in order. You're in different places. You're doing different. Okay, no, I want to get serious. I got to find out God. I got to go down some of these rabbit holes. Maybe you look at what's going on politically. I did a whole video on Christ is the bottom of the rabbit hole. Like, so in the Matrix, follow the white rabbit. Right. Now that leads you into Alice Wonderland territory, but Christ, if you go down the, whatever conspiracy theory, whatever alternative paradigm, it's ultimately Christ. Christ, it's through the logos that we escape the Matrix.
Listen, I was just talking with a wonderful couple about this week, and I have a friend, great guy, and him and I never talked about it explicitly, but I'm pretty sure he's like a LeVay guy, because he has like a little kind of like, picture LeVay in the back of his, I frequent one of his businesses, whatever. And we track on all these things, talking about, the totalitarianism that's coming. And you have these conversations with these people, and it's like, they can see the what in regards of like, what's happened, totalitarianism, and all the levels in which it's happened, right? I mean, I think everyone knows what I'm talking about, right?
Yep.
They can understand the kind of how it's happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
On every level, right? But they always stop short, and they struggle with the why.
Mm.
And what's funny is you can get lost, and people do get lost in the myriad of theories.
Right.
But I'll give you a little, it's almost like a little magic trick, no pun intended. You put Christ in there, boom. Or even, you can not put Christ and put the fallen ones in there. And the why,
right?
Again, everything
falls
into place so perfectly you can't help but just accept it as the truth, because no other why puts it all together like that.
Right.
No other why takes into context, let's say, the incompetence of the government, which is real, because I've done work with the military. I'll tell you, they're incompetent in many ways, right? It isn't this cabal in regards of like Mr. Burns back there going, like, cabals exist, don't get me wrong. And then we could spend another 4 hours talking about the cabals.
Right.
But when you actually get into the rubber meeting the road and the cogs, there's plenty of incompetence, right? And even in regards, we start getting into, quote unquote, magicians, maguses, and those who practice, it's like there's an aspect in which it's not even about what they know.
Right.
It's irrelevant, right? Are you following what I'm saying? Like, there is something behind. What's behind, right? We wrestle not against flesh and blood, right?
Right.
This understanding is huge because Christ is at the bottom of the rabbit hole, right? And here's the thing. Is he not humble? Is he not just sitting and just like, and even those who would be his followers, he's like, I'm here. He does enough to try to beckon out of love, but never crossing that boundary, never forcing, always being like, I'm here waiting, if you will. But there's so many people, whether it's subcultures, whether it's theories, they find themselves. And why is it? When you look at the Orthodox Church as she's manifested here in the States, it's weird because it's this motley crew of people that just, forgive me. I just want to digress real quick. I'm sorry, this is going to derail us, but there is this really absurd, ridiculous. Can I mention a news site or not? Okay, NPR. They threw out this thing of like, trying to put the target on the church in regards to it being this hotbed of drawing white nationalists and all that stuff. Now, there may be some truth to that. Sure, we can have a little whole to talk about that, but it's a hit piece.
Right.
Right. It's a hit piece because anyone who's actually in the church, if you're actually in the church, you'll notice that like there is way more diversity culturally, than people realize, right?
The marriages. The whole.
How do you
thing.
get such a motley crew? Like it only makes sense, like because Christ, right? He draws all people to himself, and we can get a whole thing. I know we were talking. I have the whole timeline of 2020 and how you see that the evil one is behind all of this. But maybe we can talk about that another time. But I'll just point out one thing, right? Mm-hmm. 5 days before Pentecost, 2020. You know what happened 5 days before Pentecost?
Mm-mm.
George Floyd.
Oh.
What was the symbol of George Floyd? What was the big thing, right? The kneeling on the neck, right?
Right.
Okay. Well, what do we do at the liturgy of Pentecost, right? What do we do? What do we do Vespers right afterwards? What is it? Kneeling Vespers, right? We're now kneeling because we've been waiting, right? So the world had its Antichrist Pentecost 5 days before our Pentecost, right?
And the Spirit's the breath of God, right? So then we
Spirit's the breath of God, right? And so Pentecost is the inversion of the Tower of Babel. It's in the Troparion, the Kotakian, right? Mm-hmm. The church is how Christ deals with division, right? Mm-hmm. Where man was divided through tongues, Christ unites them through the tongues of fire, right? And in the kneeling, we humble ourselves before God, right? But the kneeling of George Floyd in the world was not the kneeling of Christ. And we can get into a whole thing, and it goes on beyond that. But the point I'm trying to get at is you begin to see how Christ in the humility of the church begins to make everything. He's the thing that unites the fabric of reality. Yeah. And you're like, this is what it is. And let me just say one more thing. Forgive me. And this is why asceticism is so important. And I would just forgive me because I'm a priest, so I got to give out a little bit of pastoral or whatever. But like, everybody, if you're approaching orthodoxy, forgive me for saying it like this, it's not like a PSA, but like if you're approaching orthodoxy, you have to have some measure of the ascetic life. Yeah. Without it, it's not orthodoxy, because asceticism begins to teach you, it takes humility out of an abstract concept and makes it concrete and objective. Do you understand what I'm saying? Yep. Asceticism teaches you how to take your desires, your appetites, and submit them and a proper way by which you can learn to receive, which is another reason why we're about to enter into alphabet soup month, right? Pretty soon.
Yep.
And this is why we reject it, because fundamentally having an alphabet soup month is all about teaching you to put forward your appetites to the detriment of everyone else.
What's the name of the month?
Yourself.
It's Pride Month.
It's Pride Month. I mean, literally, right?
And they're forming identities with it pridefully within their their sexual behaviors, right? So this is then creating their identity.
Pun intended, right?
Yeah.
And so we're at a place where, and again, I just encourage some people, you know, we have a saying here: if someone shows you who they are, believe them.
I like that.
It's so evident, these things, you know what I mean? And you go back and you see how these things have been put into place for a long time, and they're just now kind of coming to the surface. But like, you know, the brazenness of the handlers, right? That brazenness is their downfall.
Right. No, when you were speaking about how Christ sort of brings everything together, I immediately began to think of his healing of the blind man. And again, at a point in Scripture when he recognizes who God is, and he receives his sight. And so again, as we go down these conspiracy rabbit holes, whether it be the politics, it's like all roads, as somebody said in the comment section, all roads lead to God.
That's right.
The true God. But it requires then the feet to move down those roads, to journey in a humble way, pursuing truth, that then eventually that's what sold me with orthodoxy as I went further into it. It's like so many things continue to fall into place that it's like I either reject it because of the difficulty and I just don't want to do that because I can't reject it because I don't see it as true. That's the only thing I continue to see. And so it's like all of us in our own spiritual journey, we're all sort of the blind man, that as we come closer, then we recognize who Christ is. And as you said, once you put that piece, the who, then you understand the why of the whole context, the whole spiritual context, the real fundamentals of reality. It all falls into place. And that's how then in a way we're no longer blinded. Now we are blinded, you know, to different degrees, but in a way we can see things that in the rest of the world, they cannot see them. They literally cannot see them.
They cannot see them. And if I may, if I could, you know, again, digress a little bit, getting back to kind of an earlier point that we were talking about in regards to the icon. One of the things as an iconographer that I strive for is simplicity. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that can ruin an experience in an iconographic expression is an undue complexity. The complexity in its proper sense in the icon is revealed through a proper orientation of the elements of the icon. So in other words, the composition, the line, the color, the theological, moral, the anagogical, all those things must be presented in the icon in a kind of simplicity that allows the harmony to be put forward. Many times you can tell when someone's a neophyte iconographer or these things where there's an undue complexity that comes in it, and it obscures what's being presented. This is the same thing that happens on a personal level, you know, and as a confessor, so much, you know, let's say if I'm taking on someone, like I have a new spiritual child or something, there's not just in regards to the familiarity that we have to actually like enter into, but really that familiarity is really a process of me waiting for them to come into a place of simplicity, because there's so much noise going on and the complexity, people wanting to make their issue complex when really the truth is found in simplicity. Are you following what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I am.
Simplicity, there are these things that we experience as manifestations of God. Balance is a manifestation of God. Like when you encounter balance, you begin to encounter a manifestation. Well, it's almost, if you will, forgive me, I don't mean it in an explicitly or explicitly like Palamite expression, but an energy of God is experiencing balance, right?
Well, aesthetics, right? I mean, it's
correct.
The fundamentals to aesthetics and beauty.
Correct. Simplicity being a facet of that, if you're following me, right?
Yeah.
Well, simplicity is a manifestation of humility, right?
Yeah.
The simplicity that you experience in an icon, right? It's part of the way that humility is being expressed. Are you following me,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So one of the things that people struggle with, you know, you can get down, let's get down with somebody. Let's like talk about all the different theories, blah, blah, blah. And like, and people can start to spin out. And then you just try to like, you drop the mic and you bring up Christ, and it just, Christ starts snapping into place. Very simply, all these things. I've seen this happen so many times, and it's sad. You can watch a person, if you know how to read people, you watch it in their eyes, you watch it in some of their body language, and you know something's happening, but very quickly, boom, the dissonance is too much for them, and now they have to introduce complexity. That's too simple. No. And then they start to become frenetic, right? And their facial expressions, they just start to become frenetic. I know.
It gets back to the metaphor you use for the walls, right? Yeah. In a way, again, the humility of Christ brings about the simplicity of the entirety. He couldn't the entire New Testament couldn't have been in the immense capacity of the wholeness of what it's trying to portray, couldn't have been done more simply.
Couldn't have been. And those of us, this is something that I'm blown away. My spiritual father in California, you know, he brought me into the church, you know, catechized me. He was a Baptist preacher, and he says this thing is beautiful. He says, you know, the Baptists introduced me to Jesus, and then Jesus introduced me to his church. And then, you know, he's been an Orthodox priest for however, you know, many years. But like the thing that's so fascinating is that, and if I could digress again, one of the things that him and I connected early on is this love of scripture. And this is why I'm thankful for my evangelical background. It taught me a love of scripture, but boy, oh boy, has it taken a long time for me to unpack all the garbage.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason why I'm saying this is because for many of us who convert, there's this unfortunate time period. Well, you know, I know some Orthodox folk, they haven't read the Bible in 2 years, 3 years. You know what I mean? Yeah. Of course, they hear the gospel and they experience it. You understand what I'm saying?
Yep.
But they're so burnt out and, you know, disheveled. I don't want to say traumatized, you know, quote unquote, but you get what I'm saying. And I get it, right? They need to take a break. But what I'm trying to get at is, I love the scriptures now in a way that, like, my love of the scriptures now looks like makes my love for the scriptures back then as hate. And here's what I'm trying to get at. Mm-hmm. The simplicity of the scriptures, which that's one of the greatest errors that evangelicals make, is this thought like, no, you guys talking about the fathers and sola scriptura. And it's like, no, any child should be able to read it. It's like, no, you don't understand actually how profound the scriptures are. The simplicity of the scriptures are deceptive. They're deceptive. And the simplicity of the scriptures is actually what's needed to bring you into the profundity. Because when you start getting into the scriptures, like me reading the scriptures now, yes, as a priest, but first and foremost as a disciple, it blows me away that they're so profound. It's just like, what is this? You start to understand why the fathers hold it. What's crazy is I to all those who would be evangelicals who might be watching this, like, what you guys don't get is, like, you don't understand, like, on the one hand you do, but you really don't understand how profound the scriptures actually are. Right. Because you are not quite understanding the simplicity and what the simplicity is, how it functions, what it's there for. The simplicity is a humility to allow you to enter in to receive something. But once you're actually in there, you start reading the patristic, you start acquiring the patristic mind in regards of the scriptures. You're like, I've never read the scriptures before. What is this? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
The scriptures are so simple. Yes. But once you get in there, it's the most like, how is it that I have read the scriptures for, 25 plus 30 years now at this point, and it's like I've never read them before.
Right.
what is that? It's a mystery, right?
Right.
And you are brought into a complexity that is never busy, that is never confused, that is never muddled, but the complexity is revealed through its profound simplicity. And it's that paradox, right? But this is the spiritual life, right?
Yeah, I love, as you were talking again, it's like scripture, if it was too overly focused on minor details,
Yep.
it would offer again the metaphor of more walls, conceptual walls being built between God. But in the way that, again, through God's providence, we have received the scriptures and the gospel, it presents it in a way that it is a simplistic door that enters into a world of meaning that again, you can only so the depth of meaning is endless because it's entering into the mystery of God, which has no end, but it can only be presented in the most simplistic way possible to convey the framework, to get the framework through which we've passed through.
Because he wants people to open the door.
Right.
If it was some kind of crazy Houdini Chinese finger trap thing where it's just like, and this is where, the Gnostics and the neo-Gnostics and the whole like emphasis on initiation. Yep. And it has to be this complex thing. And this is one of the ways you can always tell when the occultists start getting into it, because the confounding through the confounding and the perplexity that's presented through complexity, that's a trap. Are you following what I'm saying?
Yes.
That's a trap, and that's them showing their hand. It's pride.
Yep.
It's vanity. Christ, I am the door.
That's what he said. Yeah, exactly. As straightforward and simple as can be said.
I am the door, and the way you just said it, it's a door into an incredible world. Yeah. And that world is like beyond the wildest complex, like all of the craziness of the most deluded occultists can't compare to just like, listen, if you want your mind blown and turned inside out, you start reading, the Optina elders. You start reading some of the accounts of the elders. Listen, Saint Porphyrios, right? Saint Porphyrios, his spiritual son, he's like, hey, he calls up Yorunda, I have this problem, blah, 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 whatever. He gets his answer. Thank you, Yorunda, da, 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 da. He's ready to hang up. Saint Porphyrios says to him, oh, and by the way, you don't call me on this line again. You won't get me. He's like, what do you mean? He's like, I died 3 weeks ago. Yeah, that's the spiritual life. Yeah, you want to get turned inside out? Start reading about Saint Seraphim Sarab and his encounters with his nuns. Like, people have like the spiritual life as it's this world, this other world that Jesus is the door to. Jesus, the simple door. So all my evangelical brothers and sisters out there, God bless you. Yes, it's simple. You may think we're making it complex. We're not. This is just the reality. The door is simple. And what's funny is the rejection of the simplicity of the church. The need, listen, the need to make it complex, right? Let me tell you something. Part of the problem with the evangelical Protestant mindset is like you have to be kind of like your own pope and master of the scriptures. You have to finagle everything in such a way that like, it's real simple. You get baptized, you confess, you receive the secrets, right? A mentally disabled 15-year-old boy can enter into and partake and participate with the living God just as deeply, if not more deeply, than a 50-year-old PhD celebrated clergyman. Right. Are you following me?
Yep. Simple.
And it's the door is simple, but you have to have the humility to be like, and that's why I love and forgive me my ignorance, and I don't know if there's a deeper tradition there, but I'll just go real low in regards of pop culture of like the third Indiana Jones movie, right? Yeah. But like the Holy Grail, that whole part is really great. It's like, well, which one was the carpenter's cup? You know what I'm talking about, right? It's like there's something profound in that, even though it's a pop culture reference. Right. It's right. The simple cup. There's something to that. because once you take a drink, once you turn the doorknob, oh boy,
Right.
it'll turn you inside out for sure.
Right. No, and that's where this orthodoxy thing, I always try to tell people, it is a process, that this is not a born again today, that everybody I know that has continued, because I have unfortunately met a lot of people who became very enamored with orthodoxy, and then they end up becoming a catechumen or even getting into the church, and then they really weren't ready for the reality of it, and pretty soon they're back, to what they were doing before, or disregarding or denouncing orthodoxy or Christianity or whatever. But I love it because when you're talking about this door and the simplicity, really the only necessity of complexity for the church was to differentiate itself from the world. So then we start looking at the theology and the energy essence distinction, and how, now we're dealing with, Platonic categories and Aristotelian understandings of things proper to substance, nature. And it's like, yeah, this is complicated. This can be very minute and detail oriented, but this is really just the way the church had to differentiate itself from the world to then show, to say, hey, look, we have the simple door. And then in a very complex way, this is why our door and this whole thing is very different from everything else. It's the only door like this in the world.
That's right. And this is exemplified in the lives of the saints. Mm-hmm. St. Anthony being able to confound the wise men, St. Catherine, being able to confound the wise men. Like these examples of saints being able to confound the wise men with their simplicity of experience and communion. Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. This is why noetic experience will always trump. And again, there's a place for academic theologians in the context of how we explained it earlier.
Right.
But see, the place for an academic theologian like a Father John Romanides, the place for that is to help the world begin to enter into a place of understanding the profundity which is experienced primarily through simplicity and humility of God. That's the place of the academic theologian, is to help to articulate and build bridges, right? Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, part of what's built into academia is this kind of hubris. Like, look, like if you want to do well in academia, you got to kill your dad, right?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, how do I look who was ahead of me? How do I take their thesis, and how do I destroy? How do I build off of by killing? I got to kill my dad if I want to be somebody.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And so for our academic theologians, it's quite the opposite, right? I need to understand what my father has taught, what my fathers have taught, and let me now find, with God's help, the means to articulate this understanding, patristic, meaning father, right? And to articulate this and build a bridge.
Yes.
Or for my generation.
Yes. No, that's it. Amen to that. Maybe that's a good place to kind of end the conversation, but that's exactly what I see the role of the sort of philosophy and the theology to do. And I've said this multiple times, that's what I believe I'm doing with this YouTube channel. Is my whole thing is to try to build conceptual bridges that when I look back at myself, I needed what I believe, hopefully, God willing, I can provide through these streams, bridges, conceptual bridges that allow me to walk over into the paradise of orthodoxy, into this entire world. Beautiful. Because it's very difficult to even get ingratiated to it. So I understand people are going to need to watch 20 videos before they're like, I don't know, I think I may go to an Orthodox church.
Right.
But that's the point. The point is to build a sort of comfortability with the ideas, the terminology, the concepts, and then, speak to modern day witchcraft, the Travis Scott concert, things that then is resonating with the contemporary scene. Again, so the bridges, the role of the theologians in the church is to continually, as time moves forward, building the bridges out into the world to cross into for those willing to submit to the humility, to follow the truth, to enter through that doorway.
Beautiful. And God bless your work. And again, we were talking earlier, I just forgive me for going there, but a shout out to Asher, because, that's my son out there, and he's been watching you, and you're building that bridge. And that's the evidence of it, is that, reaching young minds, so that they could, if they will, walk into paradise. I love it. That's absolutely it. May God continue to increase and bless your ministry.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Father Turbo. Again, thank you so much for coming. Every time we've had 2 conversations, but they're electrifying every time. I feel like we hit so many good things in this video and really unpack this concept of humility, and we just riff off each other. I love it. There's not a whole lot planned. We just have a general topic. And this has been really, really wonderful. Again, I want to thank you so much for coming on here. I have a few super chats, if you wouldn't mind.
Great, no problem.
I think some people, I want to be courteous of your time. I know you're a very busy gentleman. And this is not a super chat, but this is a comment I found over on Rockfin that I wanted to share with you because it's somebody who's trying to speak to you directly. And this is from Ryan Darrow. And he says, Father Turbo, you may not remember me, but I spoke with you many years ago when you were introduced to me by a coworker, James. That was one of the first instances of contact with Orthodoxy. I saw you again when Father Deacon Ananias invited me to St. Barnabas. Praise God, I'm pleased to tell you, my wife and I will be baptized this month. I wanted to tell you you've been a part of my journey to Orthodoxy. Thank you.
God bless you. God bless you. And I'm just humbled. I'm humbled by that. To be a part of anyone's life is a profound, profound, sacred thing. So God bless you and your wife, and may God grant you many years and welcome home.
Amen to that. First super chat comes from Jessica Z. Shout out to Jessica Z. Throws in $65. Wow. Thank you so much, Jessica Z. Jessica Z is a newer woman in the community who's sort of rediscovered or not rediscovered, discovered Orthodoxy. Wasn't familiar with it. And I know she commented she was very excited for you to come on. She watched your video with Allison on my channel, and then that's how she became aware of your Royal Path podcast, and then so she was obviously very thankful for today's stream. So thank you so much, Jessica Z, for the support.
God bless you. Next
super chat comes from Disgruntled Docs and says, "Amazing work, DPH and Father Turbo. Y'all two are a blessing." Shout out to Disgruntled Docs. Thank you very, very much, brother, and God bless you and your wife and your family. Next super chat comes from Tatiana, and she says, "Thanks for helping me to focus on what's truly important. Prayer hands. God bless you, and God bless Father Turbo. Christ is risen." And truly he is risen. So thank you so much, Tatiana, for the super chat. Next one comes from, I think this is obviously a pun, a joke. Coming from Proud and Humble, throws in $5 and says, "Speaking of humility, I'm very proud of my humility." Thank you so much, Proud and Humble, for the $5 super chat. I truly do appreciate it. Next one comes from Corey Mark Fisher, throws in $10. Thank you so much, Corey Mark Fisher. He says, "God bless you, Father Turbo and DPH. My fiance and I binge the Royal Path at home and bump it in the car when we're out and about. We can't thank God enough for calling you to be a presence on the internet. Thank you. Christ is risen."
Truly is risen.
Truly is risen.
God bless you.
Thank you so much, Corey Mark Fisher, for the super chat. Jessica Z throws in another $5 and says this is for Aaron. So maybe that was something going on in the live chat while we were talking. I'm not sure. But thank you, Jessica, for super chatting for Aaron. I think Aaron may be he super chatted last night. His online name is Aaron the Big Black Dude. And he was talking about how excited he was for you coming on today, that he really, really loves your ministry and listens to all your
God bless you, Aaron. God bless you.
Next super chat comes from Meta Ninjas. Throws in $15 and says, "Missed the entire live, but pretty sure it was fire." Well, thank you so much, Meta Ninjas. I hope you're able to catch up on it. And I do think it was really, really good. Again, we're going to have to do another one. I have to come up with another topic, again, maybe in like a month or two. I know how busy you are. But these are so deep and rich whenever we can dive into some of these topics. Next one comes from Michael and Maria, the last super chat. And it says, in my personal history with the atheist, secular, Western intellectual tradition, I was so full of ego and pride. I thought I had all the answers. It has been a blessing to be in the church and at least struggling to move away from that. Love you both.
God bless you.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Michael and Maria is a Orthodox couple down south, continual supporters of this channel. So thank you so much, Michael and Maria, for your super chat. Really, really do appreciate that. And it looks like we got one more super chat from somebody you know very well. PBF Live throws in $10 and no comment. But
God bless you.
Yeah, thank you so much, PBF Live, for the $10 super chat. And guys, please smash that like. Share this stream if you can. Please refer to Father Turbo. I'll have your YouTube and the Royal Path podcast. I'll have that in the video description.
Patristic Faith too. Patristic Faith.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
Shout out to Father Deacon.
Shout out to Father Deacon Dr. Ananias. Yeah, I'll have them also put this video up on Patristic Faith. This would be a really good one for the website. So, yeah, you
know what? I'm hoping, forgive me, God willing, and the Lord doesn't tarry, you know, maybe next year I'll be able to make it out to Montana.
Oh,
I mean,
that would be great.
Because I got to meet you in person and give you a hug, man. You know what I mean?
I would love that. Yeah. That would be so much.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to meet Abbot Trifon.
He's so wonderful.
I've never met him. I've watched so many hours of Abbot Trifon.
He's so wonderful.
And I'm so it's funny, this whole Orthodox thing. It's like I'll be starstruck with a monk, and I'll be like, yeah, I'm I'll ask for a blessing. Yeah, I'm a big fan.
Yeah, he's great. I love him.
Yeah, that would be awesome if we were going. So maybe Montanica 2023 will be that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, God willing.
And one more super chat, last one from the Kingdom Kid. Shout out to the Kingdom Kid. She's also a newer inquirer into Orthodoxy, and she says, "Great talk. Thanks to both of you for being a blessing in my life." Well, God bless you, Kingdom Kid. Again, she's a female inquirer in Orthodoxy. God bless you in your journey, and I wish you nothing but the absolute best. So thank you. Again, just special shout-outs to the Kingdom Kid, PBF Live, Michael and Maria, Meta Ninjas, Jessica Z, Corey, Mark, Fisher, Proud and Humble, Tatiana, and Disgruntled Docs. Thank you guys so much for the support. And Father Turbo, thank you so much for coming on again. This has been an absolute blast. Really looking forward to, God willing, we can do this again in the future.
Anytime you want me on, I'm yours.
All right.
I'm humbled, pun intended, to be able to participate. And again, God bless you in your work. And everyone out there, keep supporting DPH, keep supporting all the other brothers that are out there and really trying to bear witness on the internet. I know you can roll our eyes at it, but it's really good work and good ministry that you're doing. So, thank you again.
I'm humbled. Thank you so much.
The content.
It means a lot coming from you, Father Turbo. I really do appreciate it. And be prepared. Now that I have your personal phone number, I will be texting you about a stream in the future. So
anytime.
Well, God bless you and your family. Shout out to Asher. I hope you're also enjoying the stream. Your dad is a rock star. So God bless everybody out there. Please smash that like, and I will be back either Thursday or Friday with another stream. So until then, is there anything you'd like to say before we hop off here, fella?
Christ is risen.
Truly.